Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 97. Thor, Jotunheim. Given how his last visit to the realm turned out, Thor was understandably nervous about going to Jotunheim. He'd been a fool. The worst sort of fool imaginable, and the Jotuns had every right to, as his human companion said, kick his ass. An odd but fitting euphemism. He didn't think there was a weir guild big enough to pay penance for what he'd done here. The worst part was he had no idea how many Jotuns he'd killed for absolutely no reason whatever. Over an insult. A mild insult at that. Norns, but he'd been an idiot. And for Thor, the worst part of it all was that he hadn't been the only one to pay for that mistake. He hadn't even been the primary one to pay. A few days powerless on Earth was hardly recompense for the damage he'd done. No, it had been Loki who had paid the price for his idiocy. Thor didn't think he'd ever forgive himself for that. Thor was sorely tempted to ask one of the others to carry Mjolnir in an attempt to appear as peaceful as he could, but he was unsure whether she would permit such or not. It was hardly an emergency, and there was a part of him that thought perhaps that was a cheat. He'd messed this up all on his own. He was going to have to fix it the same way. They got no more than a dozen feet from the landing area when they were surrounded by at least 20 very irritated and angry-looking Jotuns. Thor went very still and tried to look as innocuous as he possibly could for whatever good that would do. Not much in all likelihood. Why have you come? One of them demanded, sounding angry. We've come to meet with Farbati, Tony said, his tone surprisingly calm and conciliatory compared to the antagonism he displayed in Alfheim, to speak of preparations for the coming of Thanos, and with a potential offer for your people. The Jotun regarded the group with open suspicion for a minute or two, but finally grunted in reluctant-sounding acquiescence and turned to lead them to wherever it was they were to go. Thor did not fail to notice that he was effectively surrounded, and that all the Jotuns in his vicinity had preemptively extended ice weapons on their persons. More than one of them were growling. Thor just did his best to look like he had no intentions whatever of getting violent and hoped it'd be enough. The last thing he wanted was for the humans to get caught in the Jotun's grievance with him. Bless Tony. He seemed very aware of the tense atmosphere and turned his attention to the nearest Jotun. So, what's your name? Tony asked. The Jotun blinked at Tony, and Thor fought down a grin at their confusion. Tony seemed to have that effect on people. I am Valdir, the Jotun replied. Then, in an apparent fit of their own curiosity, I have never seen a Midgardian before. Are you also different? That one is taller than you and gold-haired. The other is tall as well, but dark-haired like you. Yeah, Midgard's people, we call ourselves humans, are pretty different looking. Lots of different hair colors, eye colors, and skin colors. Skin colors? Like the Vanir and the elves? Vanir asked. More like the Vanir than the elves, Steve offered. We don't have anyone with pure white or pure black skin. We're all closer to the Vanir in height, too, than the elves. Valdir went quiet at that point, their curiosity apparently satisfied. But the discussion, however brief, had cut some of the tension in the air, which was a relief. They had every reason to be antagonistic to Thor, and he knew it, but he didn't know how long he'd have been able to stand that constant air of impending violence with anything approaching equanimity. They were led past the remains of what had once been their capital city, but was now empty ruins. They had been so even before the events of a year past, which afforded Thor some small hope that few, if any, had died, when the Bifrost had been focused here for a minute. At any rate, they were led past the ruins of the capital city and to the mountains nearest, specifically to some caves at the base of the mountains. 4 of the Jotuns turned on Thor. You, one of them snapped in a poisonous tone, will leave all weapons here, especially that. The Jotun indicated Mjolnir. Any hint of violence from you, any attempt to call that to you, and your life is forfeit. Thor did not demur. Even if he'd wanted to, this was hardly the time. But he did not wish to demur. He simply and silently set Mjolnir down. She was the only weapon he had brought with him on the tour. For that matter, she was the only weapon he'd carried with any regularity since she had been gifted to him. The moment he set it down, a third Jotun encased Mjolnir in roughly 3 feet of solid ice. Not that he had any intention of summoning her, but Thor doubted the ice would stop her if he did. It would, however, serve to warn anyone in the vicinity that he had summoned her before she actually took off. From there, they were led deeper into the cave system. Thor did not fail to notice the Jotun at his back, ice weapon at the ready. Steve and Tony both were casting uneasy looks behind them from time to time. Thor just gave his head a small shake each time to reassure them. Eventually, they were led into what looked to be a large communal gathering area with close to 100 Jotuns within, all of them with ice weapons at the ready. Okay, whoa, Tony said. Look, I know you guys have reason to be twitchy around Thor, but can we ease off just a little? I feel like if I blink wrong, there's gonna be blood on the floor a second later. The Jotun at the far end of the room, Thor had no idea if it was Farbody or not, as he was unable to see their facial markings clearly at this distance, eyed Tony for a moment before nodding. You have a point, human. And they waved their hand. About half the Jotuns in the room let their ice weapons dissipate. They were permitted closer then, and Thor realized it was indeed Farbody who had addressed them. Thor slowly and carefully drew even with Tony and Steve. Soldier had been lingering back by Thor, though to what aim Thor could not say. Careful to stay as harmless looking as he could, even as both men shot him looks, and most of the Jotuns in the room tensed. Thor honestly didn't think it would do much, if any good, but he had to try. If this won him even a shred of tolerance from Farbody, it would be worth it ultimately for Loki's sake. Loki might not be ready to deal with his Jotun relatives anytime soon, but it would work a lot better if, when he did, said Jotun relatives didn't want to behead Thor on sight. He dropped to one knee and dropped his eyes to the floor.
I beg your forgiveness, Queen Farbody. In my arrogance and intemperance a year past, I caused the death and injury of many of your people. Did I think a mere were-guild could recompense such a loss, I would gladly pay it, but I know it cannot.
There was a long, fraught moment of silence, and then a blue-skinned hand reached out to touch his chin. Thor started to jerk away instinctively, fully expecting the same biting touch that had done such damage to Volstagg. He managed to abort the motion after a spastic twitch, as to his complete shock the fingers were, well, not warm, but certainly not freeze-skin solid cold either. You surprise me, Farbody said, and for a wonder I suspect you are in earnest. Has the last year changed you so much, Asgardian?
Thor grimaced a little. Aye, it has,
he said,
and in ways I did not think to expect, either.
Farbody hummed slightly, but let his chin go. We shall contemplate what amends can be made for the damage you have done, but the repayment must needs be delayed until the danger from Thanos is past. We can ill afford the warrior of your capabilities to be sidelined during that battle. Now, you may rise. Thor got to his feet, fighting a happy grin that might be misinterpreted. That had gone much better than he'd thought it would. He'd fully expected for his attempt at an apology to be dismissed out of hand. Stephen gripped his arm and gave him a pleased look and nod. Tony, after a moment, took over the talking. Okay, here's the thing. According to Frigga, Jotunheim is not in good shape, and there isn't really any way to fix it. And the other realms really don't have much of anywhere you can go. Farbody did not look happy about confirming that, but confirm it they did. This is so. Well, you'll have to talk it over with your people, and we'd have to clear it with the governments of Earth, but we may have a solution. One of our continents, that we call Antarctica, is pretty much constantly under ice. Most of the continent never gets above freezing, either, even in midsummer. The coasts do sometimes, but inland, no. It's even dark 6 months of the year. Though the other 6, it is admittedly a lot brighter than... Tony waved a hand at the sky hidden by the rock over their heads. I think you guys might be used to, if what's out there is the norm for you. If both sides agreed, you could move and live there. There wouldn't even be all that many humans around to bother you, as we're not all that comfortable at such cold temperatures. There's all of about 5,000 people on the continent during the warmest weather, and roughly 1,000 during the coldest. And they wouldn't be wandering around much. They'd mostly all be in science research stations. Farbati blinked at Tony, and Thor fancied he could see the flare of hope, not just in her expression, but in those of the other Jotuns in the room. You are in earnest? Farbati asked. Yeah, like I said, there'd have to be some talking on both sides, but it's a possibility, Tony said. And if that falls through, well, there are other things we can do to help, like trade your magical abilities for food or something. Our magical abilities? Farbati asked. Yeah, Earth has some places that are pretty prone to really bad fires. We've got ways to get them under control, but I'm thinking your way might be a lot faster and a lot less dangerous, Tony said. And that's just the most obvious option I could think of right off the bat. That will definitely need talking over at a later time, Farbati agreed. In the meantime, let us discuss what is to be done about Thanos. Right, Steve said. Our basic plan is to have your people spread out along the coastlines where you'd have access to all the water you could possibly need, both for defense and for your own comfort. Whether they work solo or in teams or whatever will, of course, be up to you. Farbati nodded. This is a solid plan, and we'll make the most of our abilities, she agreed. I intend to send our remaining battle masters, those of us old enough to be capable of truly great magical feats in combat, but still young enough to fight, as well as those that are beyond the prime of their fighting years but can compensate for that loss with even greater magic. Sounds like a good plan to me, Steve said. They talked over a few more things for a little while. Gradually, the Jotuns relaxed a little. Some of them still kept their ice weapons, but by the time the talking wrapped up, most of them had let their weapons dissipate. Thor decided to take that as a good sign. Farbati actually walked them towards the exit. When they were mostly alone, she glanced at the three of them. I would ask after the well-being of our child, Tony said. It's still a mess, to be honest, Your Majesty, he admitted. He'll get better eventually, but right now it's kind of a case of getting way too much dumped on his head way too fast. Farbati sighed. If Loki begins to calm and to show signs of accepting his heritage, let him know I would speak with him. There are things he will need to know. Will do, Tony said. They were escorted to the Bifrost zone, and Tony heaved a sigh of relief. Next stop, home, he said, with every sign of relish. Not that this wasn't fun, but damn, I haven't done this much glad handling this many days in a row in years. Also, you did get back there, Fabio. Thor glowered at the nickname, but before he could come up with something to say to it, Steven spoke up. Tony's right. You did good back there, Thor. I think your mom will be proud of you when she finds out, Steve said.